We're looking at the difference between leading from your heart and leading from your head. And why is that important? Well, so many times over the years, people have talked about being objective. And as a growing up as a child, I used to wonder what they meant because I've never looked at things objectively. And I don't actually like looking at things objectively. So even in the business world, for me, the heart is so much stronger than the head. And if you can lead yourself from your heart, you're never going to hurt people in the way that I've seen people get hurt. So today I've got the lovely Vick Bain with me, and we're going to be looking at this together and finding out what Vick's view of heart leadership is. So first of all, welcome, Vick. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
Well, I'm just going to start off literally by asking you, what does leading from the heart mean to you? And how do you sort of implement that in your life?
Well, we had a discussion, didn't we, a few weeks ago about success. And for me, that was really about values. So I think it's become apparent after 30, 40 years of working now that the places where I've been happiest, or the work I've done where I've been happiest and most fulfilled, is within the environments where my values have matched those around me. And I think that's very much a heartfelt thing. It's an emotional thing where you feel that you fit in, where you feel included and you can relax and be yourself. You can be happiest and therefore produce your best work.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth there. And I think most people, if you go back to the values, and people talk about values a lot these days, they can go a long way back. They can go back to your childhood, sometimes to grandparents, to other places in your life where you've seen things lived out and they've had an impact on you. So would you say that if you look back through your life, would you say there's been people that have had a particular impact on your values?
Yes, and not everybody in my immediate family have I aligned with in values, but some have. I'm definitely a bit more quirky and creative than some members of my family. But I still think in terms of my absolute passion about social justice, I think really came from my northern working class background. So those values are very important to me. And that, I think, has directly informed my recent work, especially on areas of equality and diversity and inclusion. So I think having that good sort of northeastern socialist background, that's had a very powerful impact on who I am as a person.
Yeah, what about, I mean, what would you say was if you had to choose one, and literally the one value in your life where if the storms came and the winds came and you were being pushed and pummeled all over the place, what would be the one thing that you would completely never let go of?
I think it is this concept of social justice, actually, that I've done a lot of thinking and reflecting on that over the past few years, especially with my PhD work. You have to do a lot of self-reflection during that process, and that I keep going back to that sort of the stick of rock inside me, which it seems to have directed my career, my life pathway. I always keep coming back to that, and it's just about I've got a really strong sense of the fact that we are all should be all created equal. All of our lives should have equal value and worth, and I rail against the systems which prevent that.
Yeah, I think a couple of things there. One, I'm really glad you mentioned the stick of rock because a couple of times I've been having conversations and I've been about to describe that kind of directly rooted value that goes through us as a stick of rock. And then I've thought, I'm speaking to somebody from America, for example, and I'm like, But they actually know what I'm talking about because,
Probably
I
not.
grew up with Blackpool or whatever it was written through the rocket. So they might think I'm completely gone off my head talking about that. But, living that life, one of the things I've noticed, and more the more people I talk to, is that until you're actually living true to those values that run right through your core, if you're trying to follow somebody else's values or somebody else's persuasion, when they tell you how you should live your life or how you should run your business, and these are the things that you should do, these are the principles you should follow, if they don't actually align with your heart, you actually end up, breaking your heart because you're trying to pull in that direction when actually your whole body and emotional center is telling you to stand here. And what I see is business is failing. I see people giving up because they're not getting clients. They're not kind of actually able to grow because they're personally being conflicted inside of them. Have you ever found a stage in your life where people have tried to persuade you into a different way of doing things, or perhaps criticize the way that you are doing things?
Yes, I mean, I think especially when you are younger, well, when one is younger and you have to do, all sorts of pretty hard student jobs or, very early career jobs. And I ended up, doing all of the working in various retail stores, and I even did a stint. I did a stint at McDonald's, and actually I've been vegetarian since I was 10, 11, but my dad was like, you are going to get a job, so I did 6 weeks there. And honestly, there were a few occasions where I was crying with tears rolling down my face at the tills because I hated the job. I didn't like the people. It was just, and what we were producing went so against my values, even as a 16-year-old. So that was the particular low point. And eventually, as I got into my 20s, I did a long period as being self-employed, which I really enjoyed. Didn't quite understand why. Well, why am I enjoying doing this? I think, yeah, it's really only the past 4 or 5 years I've really been mature enough to reflect on why some environments have been very positive for me and I've flourished, and then other places have been toxic, or I have found them, to me, toxic. They might be great for somebody else. And I do remember another period in my life when I first moved to London. So I had my qualifications. I got a HND in classical music, and then I did a BA degree in theatre studies and music, which aligned with my values. And then I moved to London to try and, break into the music industry in some way. But I ended up, because I knew no one, I ended up doing a lot of temping. And some of the places I was sent, I knew. I did a week at a stockbroking firm, a week in an international law firm, all of these high-flying, glossy environments. But I knew to the heart of me, I was clever enough to be there, but I did not fit in there. There was a mismatch in my values. So yeah, I don't think I would have made a good stockbroker. So.
I think for all of us, the exploration sort of period of finding our feet can actually be quite painful. I think I was very fortunate in lots of ways in that my mum, I don't know whether my dad, no, I think my dad agreed completely with her actually looking back, but they believed that your working life starts soon enough. And until you've finished your schooling, it shouldn't start before that. So none of us were actually allowed to take any kind of Saturday job or anything like that. Now, at the time, I remember thinking, well, my friends can afford, this or that, and I couldn't because we had our pocket money that we still had. But looking back, I treasured that. I treasured the fact that I was allowed to be a child, allowed to enjoy my life. And we had various jobs to do around the home, but even they weren't onerous because there were 8 of us, and mum would say, none of you chose to be born You know, we chose to have you, we're your parents. And so, yes, of course, as a family, we need to pull together. But that doesn't mean to say that you should be childminding your younger siblings, for example. So she was very clear about that. The older children they were not expected to be childminders for the younger children. And again, looking back, the amount that took from her, really, time-wise, must have been huge. But it's one of the reasons why I love looking and caring for her now. She's 98. It's a joy because I feel like I'm giving back to her everything she gave to me. But I think it also gave me an opportunity to listen to my heart. And I joined the police from university. And I knew in my heart that was the right choice. Nobody else thought it was, because it was like, yeah, but you don't even like PE. You don't even like netball, never mind, doing all the stuff you'd have to do there. But I just knew that's where my heart was calling me. Didn't really know why, but I knew it was. And once I joined and spent time there, I discovered so much about myself, learned so much, grew so much in different ways. I knew why it had been the right choice. And then going forward from there, I've had various different sort of career opportunities, and particularly developed my own businesses since 2005. And all of them have been opportunities to listen to, where is my heart leading me? And how can I make this better? How can this become more of an expression of who I am rather than an expression of who other people want me to be? So for me, that's the beauty of running your own business. So I'd love to know and to tell the viewers a little bit more about what you do, what business you're in and how are you helping people?
Well, luckily, very, very soon after I did my temping in international law firms and so on, I did manage to start breaking into the music industry. And so since that point, the late 90s, I've been working in music for many years. I discovered campaigning on behalf of musicians. So I've spent really the past 20 years being involved in lobbying and campaigning to make the music industry a better place, and aligning with work that aligns with my values. Various membership organizations. So for 13 years, I was at, it's a bit of a mouthful, the British Academy of Songwriters, Composers and Authors. I spent 6 years as CEO there. For the past 5 years, I've been on the board of the Independent Society of Musicians. I did 1 year as their president, and very happy doing that work because, yeah, it's all about social justice for musicians. But also, when I left the academy, people might not have heard of the academy, but they might have heard of the Ivor Novello Awards, especially your British audience, who we owned and ran the Ivors. But I left there coming up to about 6 years ago now because I'd had a significant illness and decided I needed to make some work-life balance changes. I loved the job, but it was very full on, very stressful. And I had a period of dealing with breast cancer, so I really needed to reassess what was happening, the balance of my life. And I decided I really, really wanted to follow my heart. So I wanted to do a PhD and also combine that with doing diversity consulting. So to make that change from being a CEO of a music membership organization to sort of, starting again, essentially rebranding. I was nearly 50 at that point, and sort of rebranding myself and starting again was quite the transition. But I was absolutely determined to make that leap, and I'm doing exactly what I want to do now. I have followed my heart. It's deeply fulfilling. I feel like I'm making a positive impact on the industry, that sense of social justice. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm spending some time studying for my PhD. I'm about 3/4 of the way through now, and I've got various projects on helping music industry clients from all across Europe getting better at being more inclusive. So it's been quite the path. quite the journey, but I'm really happy I made it.
It sounds like an area, I mean, inclusion, people talk a lot about it, don't they now, diversity and inclusion, but talking about it doesn't change anything, does it? So what would you feel is the biggest changes that you're helping people make, or that you're determined to help people make?
I think awareness, first of all. So through my research, which I try and publish as regularly as possible, I do a lot of data and statistical analysis and publish those results, because people don't realize just how undiverse and uninclusive music really is, because there is this effect of what I call the super tokens. So a token is an idea that a group of underrepresented people would become tokenized if they constitute less than 15% of a group. So a very small minority. But an impact of being a token is that they are more visible, because there's fewer of them, so they become more visible. So people always estimate diversity statistics. You know, if you go and ask the general population in the UK, well, what percentage of the population are immigrants? What percentage of the population are Black or Asian? You know, people overestimate. And in music, I think it's even worse, because we have what I call these super tokens. So women like Adele or Beyonce are super tokens, or Taylor Swift. You know, these women have very high visibility because of their phenomenal success. So whenever I talk about gender inequality in music, something that is always said to me is, what about Adele? As if her success makes up for all of the inequality in the music industry. So when I publish the statistics, people are really shocked. So for instance, in the record labels, who are the pop stars that they represent and they fund musical artists, the rosters, which is the group, the range of artists that the record labels are investing in and supporting, women constitute less than 20% of record label rosters, 20%. And with composers and songwriters, it's even worse, it's 14%. And with producers and engineers, it's even worse. It's 6%, but only 2% when you look at the top 100 most successful tracks in any one year. So there is extreme gender inequality in music, and bringing awareness to this, I think, is really important, because people don't know. And so what that invisibility allows is discriminatory behavior to continue on. So I have to bring awareness. I can work with organizations to look at their own businesses to see where they are at, and then we can come up with actions and solutions on addressing that.
I mean, that's fascinating. And those statistics are horrifying, actually. And you're absolutely right. You know, because we see the icons and the sort of the big headliners in particular, whether it's through their nationality or their gender, we see those, and we think that's fine. We don't actually ask ourselves. I imagine many of us wouldn't even consider thinking anything about the figures. We'd probably think, oh, well, of course, in the music industry, you know, it's perfectly equal. There's just as much opportunities for both. That's probably what we would think naturally if you just asked us, I suspect. Do you find that? Is that what you come across?
I've come across that all through my career. You know, I've been having these conversations for 20 years when it became obvious to me that there was a problem. And so I've been told a range of things, such as, well, it's all about talent. If the women wanted to, they could succeed. Women just aren't interested enough. They're not obsessed enough. They don't participate in music education enough. They don't like playing drums. They don't like playing the electric guitar. They're just not very good at it. You know, all of these things. And I make a list, actually, every time somebody tells me something along those lines of, you know, it comes under the banner of blame the women. I make a little note of it, and it's a growing list of excuses, and it is blatantly not true. Any of that is not true. But I've certainly realized in my deep study and research of this over the years is that it's the system, it's not the women.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, if you look at the sports industry, the same was certainly true there. They've had to do a lot of fighting, and it feels like there've been steps forward. You know, the fact that you now see a lot more about women's football, for example, than you ever did before. It wasn't because women didn't want to play football, or they actually were still playing football, but it wasn't taken seriously. The idea of following a women's, you know, England women's football team would have been, well, we might talk about it on some random television channel somewhere, but now, of course, there's a lot more support behind it. But I guess the inequality is still there. You know, it's still a battle to fight. It takes me back actually when I was in the police. Because I'd love your opinions about this, but when I was in the police, I mean, I joined at a time when women were equal. The Equality Act, you know, had set all that in place that women had to be treated equally. Now, a lot of women actually left the police force because they hadn't signed up to be out on their own in the streets. They hadn't signed up to be doing all the same shifts as the men. They hadn't signed up to be sent on the same jobs. So some of them left. The ones that stayed seemed to go through this phase of, well, I'm going to have to prove I'm as good as a man. And so, to be honest, it was really quite a battle for me because I didn't swear. I liked being a woman. You know, I was polite. I had various standards that I upheld. And so it wasn't the men that were bothered by me. It was actually the women because I was different. I didn't sort of fit this role that they felt they had to portray. They had to push themselves into this role to be taken seriously. And I was sort of proving it differently. But I could see, you know, looking back now, I can understand perhaps why they felt like that. But what also happened was, in order to try and balance the view of the public about the police and equality and diversity within the police force, there was a period where standards were dropped. So if you were joining the police from ethnic minorities, not so much women, because they'd already got women there, but particularly ethnic minorities, they were dropping sort of the entrance requirements. And of course, what that happened was it caused a lot of conflict and it caused a lot of unease and unrest within the departments of the police officers that were already there. So it didn't work. And of course, they've changed that now. You know, it's all a level playing field now, but they still fight to get people through the door. So what would be your sort of top way to promote getting this equality and diversity actually taken seriously by everybody in the music industry, of course, primarily, but even, you know, across the board?
Well, of course, there's always a lot of backlash, and you know, because if you have benefited from a position of privilege, then we've got such a strong belief about meritocracy. Oh, it needs to be, you know, everything needs to be, you know, everything is fair. You just have to work a bit hard, you know, you have to work hard enough, which I hear about women all of the time, but we do not live in a fair or a meritocratic society. So I can totally understand the thinking behind, oh, we're to get underrepresented groups in who've not benefited from privileges that we have, or we need to, you know, we need to do this, that, and the other. But of course, that just builds up resentment, which is, you know, exactly what you've described. But there can be what's called positive action, where it's not positive discrimination, because that is illegal under the Equality Act, which is probably why what you're discussing has been stopped now. But there will still be positive action initiatives, and this is where an underrepresented group can benefit from a particular activity which will allow them to benefit in the workplace, such as, you know, special intern programs, special training, mentoring, all of those sorts of things. You can say, look, it's just going to be the women in the organization, or it's just going to be, you know, returning to work mothers, or it's just going to be those with disabilities, or it's just going to be for Black, Asian, ethnic, or global majority peoples. It's just going to be for them, because this is proportional, because they are underrepresented, and we've got the data to show that, and they need a bit of help and support to enable them to get up to what you call the level playing field. I don't know if you've seen, you can see little movies on YouTube, which sort of clearly demonstrates the benefits of privilege, where people are doing races, and they get, so there's sort of 10 people going to do a 100-meter race, and they ask certain people to move forward 20, 30, 50 meters, and that's where they start from. And then everybody, the whistle goes and everybody has to race. So obviously the people who had a 30, 40, 50 meter head start are going to win the race. So, and that's a way of just sort of describing the benefits of privilege. So I was just saying before we started, I've just done a holiday around Morocco, traveling around Morocco. Yep, or any sort of country like that, you realize you have benefited absolutely from privilege, from being born in this country, from having an education. I've benefited from 20 odd years of education, having access to good housing, all of these sorts of things, which become very, very apparent when you travel around most of the world, having plumbing, having a water tap inside your house, just having food delivered to your door, all of these things. And they happen in a less dramatic way in this country as well. So I really encourage people to do some reading about privilege, because people get really defensive about it. I'm a working class, whatever, and and I'm not privileged, but you are. And just have a bit more compassion that there will be others who haven't benefited from the incredible things that you have. So organizations, if they're really serious about this, or even whole sectors, can do a lot of self-reflection, a lot of thinking about that, and then instituting positive action initiative in order to get us up to that level playing field. So yeah, there's lots to be done.
Yeah, I have seen some of those videos, and it is actually a very good way of illustrating. And I love the fact that you pointed out that privilege comes in very many different guises. I was at university with a girl who, she came to university with, I would describe it as a chip on her shoulder. It sounds an old-fashioned phrase to use, but because she had been brought up in a working class background, and she saw herself as different from myself and two other girls, she felt that, we'd had things that she hadn't had. And because she had an attitude of, it's the world against me. And we would talk for hours, we'd explore things, but she couldn't let go of that. And in fact, that held her back, because she couldn't see the very fact that she was at university meant that she had doors opened for her that how many people in the world don't have. It wasn't about, I've grown up in a family with, as I said, pocket money. We literally was very small. There was 8 of us. You can imagine how difficult it was to put food on the table for us and to make sure that we were clothed and all of these things with one income coming in. So, but she didn't see that at all. And my heart went out to her, actually, because I thought, you're missing the point here, and you're missing the chance that you've been given for doors to open for you that aren't going to open for many other people that you probably grew up with. And it's really important, isn't it, that we do look at those things and we do acknowledge those things. And then, of course, we get a chance to make the use of them. One of the things that, again, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Obviously, I come from a white background. My youngest son is now 24. He's doing a PhD. He's worked really, really hard to get where he's got to. And he's found it difficult from the other point of view, as in he's got a heart for inclusion. He's got a heart for seeing people. He doesn't see people any different. The thing is, he didn't go to school. We taught him from home. And his upbringing was very much, you are no different from anybody else. Whoever you meet in life, there's something you can give to each other. You can learn from, you can develop with, you can grow through, and so on. So he treats everybody genuinely as completely the same. He has no kind of backlog. So what he found really difficult, he did go to the sixth form to do some A levels, and then he went to university. What he found really difficult was that people assumed he wouldn't treat them the same. So they assumed because of who he was and because of his background that he couldn't possibly believe in inclusion because he was a white male, educated, bright, and so therefore he found he was being criticized by people who just took this assumption. So how could you help somebody like that? How could you help him to really sort of share and show that he genuinely believes all people are equal in the sense of to be valued in the same way?
Well, it sounds like people are stereotyping him. So I've done quite a lot of research and indeed training in music companies on stereotyping in particular, because we see the manifestation of that all over. Unconscious bias, stereotype is one form of unconscious bias. And we all do it. I do it. We all do it all of the time, and we have to, because it helps our brains work. It helps us make sense of the world around us. It helps us to think quickly. But it sounds like he's experiencing people stereotyping him, maybe in a bit more obvious way. Maybe he's more alert or sensitive to it. So it'd probably do him some good to read about stereotyping, just so he can recognize that's what people are doing. And maybe they're not being deliberately hurtful about it, but he's experiencing it as a microaggression. But then also, I guess actions speak louder than words, don't they? So what's his PhD in?
It's in classics, actually, in Greek literature.
Wow. So, I was just trying to think about a sector. Is he likely to sort of go into university lecturing? Is that what he's likely to be doing?
He's actually got a real heart to serve the public. He's quite political. So he actually would like to change. He would like to help change happen.
Well, he needs to get campaigning, doesn't he? Needs to find a great organization, whether it's environmental or indeed something to do with diversity and inclusion, or get behind a sort of heartfelt campaign that aligns with his values, and get involved as an activist. Sounds like he'd be perfect activist.
Yeah, it is a really good idea because he's a very good speaker. He loves, he's very passionate. So he's already a local councillor on the parish council. So he's already sort of out there listening to people and hearing.
Wow.
And the thing is, he finds himself, because he doesn't mind what age somebody is, he has no difference. That's just because of not being in school, actually. So after a meeting or whatever, he'll find himself in the pub talking to the elderly, particularly, and listening to them. And I think that they love it, of course. They like to be listened to. Who doesn't like to be listened to? So that suggestion is, that's very good. I think if you're watching this, I think it's a fascinating discussion, and obviously we can't go as far as we might like to. But I would love to know any questions. I'm sure Vic would. If you can share anything in a minute, I'm going to ask Vic to share her details. But, if you're watching this and you've got comments to make, you've got questions to ask, you are struggling yourself with diversity issues, maybe you feel, underused, criticized, pressured, neglected, things that are going on in your life where you just know you're not given the opportunity to shine in the way that you should be, in the way that you're perfectly capable of, then, we want to help. We want to get out there and talk about these things and to get people changing, to get people changing the underlying reasons. And actually, I'm just going to ask you this, Vic. Do you think that often people don't even realize how uninclusive they are being? Do you think they're not doing it on purpose? It's just something that they've grown up with.
Oh, absolutely. As I say, unconscious bias is a real thing. I grew up in the north, in a very huge, actually, council housing estate in the 1970s, and looking at the diversity statistics for global majority people, they just weren't there. It wasn't until we moved down south, actually, that I came across non-white children. I was, fascinated. So we're growing up in a much more multicultural society. So, but growing up in that very white, patriarchal society absolutely left an imprint and an impact on me, which I've really had to do a lot of work and self-reflection on over the years. So I can see, I can see it all around me. And even, even some family members, I find veering into using what sounds to me like pretty racist terminology, and I have to address that and say things. And, so I know that has been my upbringing, as it is for many people. So I think becoming aware of that is a really huge step that we all need to go through. So no, I don't think a lot of it is deliberate, but we all have a responsibility to each other. So deliberate or not, I think we should all, be looking and doing work on ourselves. And then if we have control of our working environments, we need to be looking at those as well. So that's so important. If you're running your own business, you could be self-employed. Well, who do you work with? As a self-employed person, or you might be employing people. Who are you employing? What sort of culture are you creating in that organization? Or if you are employed in somebody else's business, what is the culture around you? What are the values of that organization? And so I think there's lots we can be doing, but of course I don't think most people start the day thinking, right, I'm going to be as mean as possible to people around us. So, but we can all do a bit of self-reflecting.
Yeah, definitely asking yourself the question. I think particularly if you feel yourself, well, I wouldn't do that. Oh gosh, that's terrible. Sometimes we need to ask ourselves, don't we? Is that honestly true? Are there times in your life when you have dismissed somebody because they're different, because you're assuming that they can't achieve what you think that you want achieved or that you think you could? It's an important self-development process for all of us to go through. So, again, if you're watching us, if this has raised any questions for you about yourself, and how do you feel? Are you genuinely inclusive? Who is it? Like all those questions that Vick's just asked. Who are you working with, and how are relationships at work? Who would you employ? Who would you take on into your business? Asking yourself those questions, and then ask yourself, why do you feel like that? Why do you do what you do? Why do you say what you say? If you have said something that you afterwards realize wasn't the right thing at all, are you prepared to go and say sorry? Are you prepared to put it right? Because most people, when somebody apologizes, will accept that apology and feel valued and, want it because of it. So, whatever we've talked about today, if it's raised questions for you, then don't stay silent. I would love to talk to you also about your view about how we can lead from the heart, because it's only by leading from the heart that we'll ever change anything, that we'll ever actually see the values we've talked about today becoming reality for many, many more people. Thank you, Vick, first of all, for coming along. But please share, how can people get in touch with you? And if they'd like to speak to you further, what's the best way to do it?
Well, they can Google my name, Vick Bain, Vickbain. I think I'm the only Vick Bain on Google. Certainly I was the last time I checked a while ago. My website is vbain.co.uk, so they can send a message through my website, or they can find me on many social media platforms as Vick Bain, and I'd be delighted to hear from anyone. Most of my work, I mainly focus on music, but I have in the past worked with other sort of creative industry organizations, and actually earlier this year I did some work with an academic association as well, because the principles are still the same no matter what the environment is. So yeah, I'd be happy to hear from anyone.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for coming along today. I think it's been a fascinating discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And actually, I'm so surprised at how quickly the time has gone.
I know. That's a good sign. Thank you.